Great. Will you start out by just telling us a little bit about who you are, your educational background, and where you work?
Yeah, my name is Clay Anderson. I kind of fell into the profession of interpreting ass backwards. So I'm from New Mexico, born and raised. My mom and dad are both veterinarians, and I grew up in a small town. I have an identical twin brother who's deaf. So that's how I got interested in the field of interpreting by way of moving to Utah and being tired of working in the snow. So I moved to Utah. I was a framer. I ran a construction company and then decided I didn't want to work in the snow anymore. So didn't really know what to do next. I knew sign language from working with my brother, and so I reached out to the School for the Deaf just to find some information on becoming an interpreter. And they said if I took a screening, I could get a temporary certification until I could figure out what it is I wanted to do. And so I did that on a Friday and started interpreting on a Monday. So I kind of fell into it very differently than most people get into the profession of interpreting.
So do your parents sign, or you and your brother?
Yeah, my whole family signs. So growing up, my mom, when she found out my brother was deaf, he became deaf at the age of 2 from spinal meningitis. And she did a lot of research. She went to California and checked into some oral programs and didn't really like that. And in the state of New Mexico, they had a really good preschool program and then also a parent-infant program. And so at 2, my whole family started to sign. Now that we're older, my parents don't sign as much anymore, but they still can communicate. But growing up, we all signed at the dinner table so that my brother was very involved in everything that we did. Later on in years, a friend of his from school actually kind of joined the family as well, so we had 2 deaf individuals. And now when we have a family reunion, we've got about 6 total. So everybody does sign, but to varying degrees.
Okay. And what's your involvement with interpreter education?
I've worked in Utah now as an interpreter for 18 years. I work for the Sanderson Community Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. For about the last 12 years, we've received some grant funding for a program we call the ICANN program, which is the Interpreter Certification Advancement Network. Here in the state of Utah, about 12 years ago, there was a push towards the legislature to help interpreters improve their ability to improve their certification, not their abilities, their certification. So we had a lot of people who were certified at a novice level, but then were phasing out because they couldn't advance to that professional level here in the state. So there was some grant money out, and we applied for that. We developed a program that's very intense in language acquisition. So we had language mentors, we did immersion weekends, we did lots of workshops. But that's the extent of my interpreter education, never as a formal teacher, but more as a mentor and workshop presenter and a mentor in the program that we had at our deaf center.
Can you tell me a little bit more about, you said that people who were passing at the novice level were not able to advance?
Yes. Yeah, so in the state of Utah, when you get your novice certification, you have a 4-year time period to either advance to the professional level or your certification then lapses. You're not able to work anymore. So we saw that there was a large number of people who were phasing out, so to speak. So they would work for 4 years. They would try and attempt the professional level test often, but they didn't have the language fluency. You know, they understood the interpreting function, but the actual ability to do it fluently in American Sign Language was usually where they struggled. So my division, I work for like I mentioned, the Sanderson Community Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. We're not a training facility. We're actually just a community center for the deaf. But we felt like we, as an interpreting team, knew what people needed the most. We're also the division that actually administers the certification test, so we knew what people were missing, and a big part of that was language. They didn't get enough foundations in language at their training colleges. Here in Utah, we've got a 2-year program at one community college, and at one university, a 4-year program. And we're getting the same number of people, whether they come from a 2-year program or the 4-year program, but we're getting the same number of people who could not advance their certification. So that was the reason that we decided to get into the game. And we did that just in an attempt 12 years ago, and since then have been the only entity that received that grant. For a few years, a couple of the community college and the university both received the grant for a year or two, and then they we were awarded the sole grant for the next 10 years. So about 12 years or so we've done that. Very heavy in exposure to more language, American Sign Language.
Are they having trouble? Are students having trouble with grammar, vocabulary?
You know what? That's a really good question. I don't know if I could pinpoint it on something specifically, but I would say the ability to produce fluid American Sign Language as they're hearing it. So we would see that people were able to interpret, but if you said, now you tell me about your life and your kids and your this and your that, that's where they were like, wait, hold on, I have to think, and then I have to create, and then I have to. So I would say just fluency overall. I don't know if I could pinpoint vocabulary or a specific aspect of it, but just the ability to produce fluid enough ASL to pass our professional level certification. Also, transliteration as well. So in the state of Utah, there's 5 parts to the test. Some of it is ASL, some of it's more English-bound signing, and they were having a hard time doing both of those.
Okay, just keeping up with the pace of the discourse.
Yes.
Okay. How about comprehension? Is there a comprehension aspect?
Yes, absolutely. So on the test, we've got a role play, but then you do spoken English to American Sign Language to spoken English. So English bound signing to spoken English to English bound signing. So comprehension is definitely the one that people would pass the least. They could get the role play out of the way usually because that was closest to what they did every day in their jobs. I think they were more comfortable in that. But when they had to do a 10-minute rendition in American Sign Language or voice for 10 minutes, usually the 10 minutes of voicing was where they would fail. So yes, so comprehension definitely, I believe, has been a problem for a lot of young interpreters. I think the opportunity to work voicing is way less than the opportunity to actually produce sign language as an interpreter. You're seeing that people are doing more of it now as they work in VRS places. So if they go and work for a VRS company, they'll get more and more opportunities, and I think you're seeing a little bit more growth there. But by and large, I think a lot of young, new, fresh interpreters don't get the opportunity to receptively receive information and voice as much as they need to practice, to hone that skill.
You said there's a 2-year program and a 4-year program in the state of Utah, and you don't see really significant differences between the two. Is the 2-year program actually 2 years from start to finish, from beginning ASL to the end, do you know? Or
That's a good question. I don't think so. I think you have to take ASL 1 and 2 before you can apply for the program. So the interpreter program itself is 2 years, but I believe there are prerequisites. I'm not for sure, but I think it's so. You're looking at maybe 3 years there, but I do believe there's some ASL requirements before you can apply to get into the program.
Okay. Do you believe that there needs to be a shift, a change, improvement in interpreter education overall?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, like I mentioned before, not somebody who's involved in the academic side of things. I didn't go to a program. I've never had formal education as an interpreter. But my opinion as a mentor, somebody who's mentored for the last 12 years, and as a professional interpreter, is that we're lacking fundamental linguistic opportunities. I think programs need a lot more language exposure. I think they need a lot more cultural buy-in, so to speak. And this is, for me, my opinions are from the fact that, like, I came from the community. I grew up with a twin brother who's deaf, but I used to go to the school for the deaf and hang out with them for weeks at a time. And I had as many deaf friends as I had hearing friends. And so I think that's the divide that we're seeing now, is that the function is taught well, but the language and the culture and the value systems, those types of things are briefly touched on, but not enough. So yes, I do believe there's a shift that needs to happen so that so that interpreters can graduate these programs feeling confident. I say this also too because in my own background, I went to school for 2 years in building trades. Like I mentioned before, I work in construction. I think if you look at any other skilled field, when people graduate any kind of a program, they feel confident enough that they're going to go be successful in that field, whether that's construction like I did, whether that's radiology like my sister did, or whether that's interpreting. I don't see that we're seeing that in interpreting as much. The question is why? I mean, if you're putting in the same amount of time as an engineer, if an interpreter goes to a 4-year program and an engineer goes to a 4-year program, why do we see big divisions? I think that's where we need to do a lot more research to see what is missing. I don't know if I could tell you what it is, but I do think a big part of it is that language foundation is what I mean, that's from my own outside perspective. I think that we need a lot more language there so that these people, when they get into the field, feel more confident and can be more successful as they work in the profession.
I hear you saying two things. One is they definitely need a stronger language foundation and cultural sensitivity, being adroit and adept in the deaf community in language and in cultural norms and values. I also hear you saying that where in other professions and other trades, they actually prepare you all the way to being ready to work. And in this profession, we kind of get them sort of close, and then they don't have resources or support anymore to actually get to the point where they're work ready.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. So, I mean, you hear a lot of buzzwords. You hear a lot about any kind of language acquisition takes somewhere from 4 to 7 years. And I think that's similar for spoken languages. But yeah, no, I think that we do a disservice to a lot of our young interpreters that we graduate from programs and we say, great, you're ready for the world, and then they get eaten alive, whether that's by other interpreters, whether that's by deaf consumers, whether that's by I mean, I think there's a lot of adversity that could happen. We're not the best at bringing up our youngins. You know, we're not the best at teaching them and saying, this is how you do what I do. I think there's an expectation. Maybe some of that goes back to the fact that once you can work, a lot of people want to go right to work. And maybe they're not ready for that yet. Maybe they're not ready for the caliber of work. I think also there's an expectation that we see interpreters who are interpreting at a specific level, but for example, I've been doing this for 18 years, and a lot of the people that I mentor will be like, oh my gosh, I can't do what you can do. You shouldn't be able to. I've been doing this for 18 years after 30 years of language fluency. But you didn't see me when I was 15 and I had to interpret for my brother at the doctor getting a physical. You don't know what it was like when I was 21 and I was brand new as a professional. So there's this comparison that because I'm working up here at this level now, you need to, and that's not what I don't think we need. I don't think we need them to be equivalent to who and what working practitioners are today. But I think there is a big difference from where I started out and where they're starting out. And that's the gap I think that we need to figure out and improve on.
My next question is, why do you believe it's important to improve education? Well, if you believe it's important to improve education, why?
Yeah. So first off, yes, I do think it's important to improve it. Personally, I'm not an academic person. I didn't like high school. I didn't go to college in a specific field to study anything. But I have this strong belief that if you're going to go and do something, if you're going to pay the amount of money you are and spend the amount of time that you're going to spend, at the end of it, you should be able to do exactly what it is you're putting time in to do. I think our students are working hard. I think that they're receiving great information. I think that there's good stuff out there. But when everybody who goes to a 2-year program or the 4-year program in the state of Utah and gets a degree and then has to come and be in our program to learn how to interpret or improve that ability to interpret, that says everything, that answers that question right there. Yes, there definitely needs to be more so that individuals who go to a 4-year program, pay a lot of money to do that, and get out, feel confident and ready to go. I think the reason that's very important is the need for interpreters is not diminishing. It's growing all the time. If you look at burnout in interpreters, there's a lot of people who are leaving the profession for whatever reason because of burnout, and I think a lot of that's due to working long, hard hours in VRS, which is very different than a lot of the interpreting that they had done prior. So the need's there. The need's there. The community needs interpreters. We as a profession need young interpreters. But we also need them to be prepared. We need them to be ready. So if an individual gets out of a program, gets certified, they're ready to work, I, as an interpreter, need to know that when you come to work with me, you're ready to go. There's only so much I can handle doing, and I'm down to help you out as long as you're ready to go and confident in yourself. If you have some things that you're lacking, I'm down to help and support you do that. But you've got to be confident enough in your ability and your fluencies to be ready to work. I think you would expect that with anything. So, and again, I go back to these examples that I used before, but if I'm going to go to school to be an engineer, I don't know anybody who went to 4-year programs in engineering and then graduated that program and said, now I just need 4 more years of maybe a little bit of this and a little bit of that to finally maybe work in engineering. And you just don't see that kind of thing. And I know we have a very specific skill set that, there's a lot of interpersonal skills that come along with the ability to interpret, but training programs are lacking something somewhere that get people, we're getting them to the diving board and then we're pushing them off, so to speak, instead of helping them jump.
Thank you for that. I love that analogy. One more question about the ICANN program. When they come in from the college or university, is there a range or is there a certain amount of time that you're allowed to work with them?
Yeah. So the way that we developed this program, 12 years ago when we started, we saw people were leaving the profession after their 4-year cycle of novice certification was expiring. When we started the program, interestingly enough, it was very few people who had graduated college. It was working interpreters who had been working for 4 or 5 years. It was working interpreters who had worked for 8 or 9 years, and then we had passed that. That was a new law that had come into play back about 12 years ago. So they had worked for 12 years or so, and they couldn't pass the professional level. They were going to lose their certification. Those were the people we saw. Over time, it's gotten to a place now where maybe 70% or 80% of our participants are only a year or 2 out of a program, whereas before people had a lot more working experience before they had come to our program. But the way our program works is it's a 10-month-long program. We have 8 Friday night workshops that are 3 hours. We have 3 4-day immersions where we take these participants up to a cabin in the mountains and we use American Sign Language the whole time. We teach workshops throughout the day, but they have to interact with everybody in their room, when they're having lunch, when they're having dinner. It's similar to a silent weekend on steroids. So 3 of these 4-day immersion weekends. And then besides that, we have language mentors and interpreter mentors who work with them one-on-one. So in a week, a participant could meet with their language mentor on a Wednesday night for a small group. On a Thursday, they could meet with their interpreter mentor and discuss a video that they'd worked on, or maybe something that happened to them during that week in their own work. And then on a Friday night, they could go to a workshop. I mean, that's what could happen initially in a week, but that doesn't happen every single week. But that's pretty much, it was a very intense program. Over the 12 years, I would say that for the first probably 7 or 8 years, our numbers were really good in people who had attended our program and passing the test. It was around 70% or so. In the last 5 years, we've seen those numbers diminish quite a bit. And in my team, in looking at that and discussing it, really feels like also the dynamic shifted. So we were taking people who had many years of experience and maybe needed a little boost. And the reason that we're seeing, I believe, numbers drop a lot is because now the demographics have completely changed. 70% of the people coming to us for help now have a year or 2 experience is all. So what's the difference between these 2 demographic groups? And one of those just is experience. And I think that goes back to the fact that I emphasize language fluency a lot, or exposure. So maybe not fluency as much as more and more exposure to American Sign Language.
So these people are coming in from either a 3-year or a 4-year program and then getting 1 or 2 years of work experience in entry-level positions, then coming in for 10 months with intensive language support, and about 50% of them are then able to pass at the professional level.
Yeah. I think the last few years, I think 50% is even too generous. I think we've seen for about 7 or 8 years, we saw a 70% passing rate. Now that may have been in the year that they were in our program, or maybe the year following. But yes. And also to answer that, I don't know that they're coming out of those professions with entry-level jobs. So I think that a lot of kids who graduate from these programs, I shouldn't say kids, I think a lot of the young interpreters who graduate from these programs, they're doing the same stuff I'm doing as a freelance interpreter, as a VRS interpreter, as a educational interpreter, as a whatever. They're not in, I think that's one of the things that we need to realize too. We don't have an entry-level job in interpreting that I know of. If you've got a certification good enough to do the work, a school's going to give you the same job as somebody who holds their RID certification. They're not going to put you in an entry-level job with a team and foster your growth. They're going to put you in with a student and you sink or swim. If you get a job at a VRS company, they're not going to say, we're going to let you work for the next 5 months with a team and support, and we're going to help you grow. They say, you get a week-long training, get on the phones, make us some money, right? Freelance interpreters, I think agencies are the best at being like, you got this. You'll be just fine. I don't know that there's an entry-level type of job. So they're doing the same kind of work that we're all doing.
So what happens if these novice interpreters go and work at the local school?
Well, that comes at the expense of a deaf child. So I think we've seen over the years that the reason the community complains is not that they don't like interpreters, but it's because they're not receiving the services that they justifiably should receive. If I'm a deaf man and I'm going to the doctor and I request an interpreter, and an interpreting agency sends an interpreter that's not up to the ability that what I need, that's not fair to me, right? I'm in a very serious life or death situation right now. This is not just your livelihood, this is my life. I think it's worse when you talk about K through 12. So I'm very passionate about educational interpreting. I think that's where the best interpreters should work. But again, we talk about these buzzwords. It's hot right now. Language deprivation, the opportunities for young deaf kids who are mainstream to actually have language models. If you're taking somebody who just got certified and they're working with a kid in 3rd grade, you now have become their language model. You're not just an interpreter. You are their language model. You're their opportunity to socialize. You're their everything for a little while. And if you put the wrong person in that position, that can really impact this child's life today, tomorrow, and for the rest of it. So knowing and understanding that the importance of your role in those situations, I don't think people do often. I think they're excited to have their first job after graduating and going to school, which rightfully so. But that's what, again, when I mean we don't have these entry-level apprenticeship opportunities. I became an electrician. So part of my building trade stuff, I did construction, but then I wanted to switch into being an electrician. And as I worked as an electrician, I actually worked with a journeyman, which is about a 4-year person, but I was an apprentice, and I couldn't do, there was a lot of things I could not do without the journeyman. So maybe thinking about applying principles like that could be beneficial, but I think the reason that you're hearing an outcry from the community is that the warm body interpreter is not good enough. If you're going to say you're ready to come and interpret for me at a doctor's appointment, you better be ready to go. Or if you're going to come and interpret for my child at school, they better get what they need. Because you being there tells everybody else that I'm getting the services that I want and need. And so if you're not doing that, I'm the one who suffers. Child, deaf man at the hospital.
You've given me a lot to think about, and one question that's just kind of spinning around in my head is, how would you characterize your language learning experiences in comparison with your twin brother's language learning experiences and the opportunities that each of you received?
Yeah, that's a great question. Growing up, having a twin brother who's deaf, I think is very similar to, you'll hear people who grow up and their parents are deaf. So codas or people whose parents are deaf. There's a lot of similarities, but I think that one huge difference is when you're young and you're a coda and you interpret for your parents, you probably do that every once in a while. If you think about the way that children interact with their parents, 0 to 5, there's a lot of interaction. 5 to 12, there's going to be a little bit less, but still quite a bit of interaction. 12 to 18, it goes down quite a bit. Kids don't need their parents as much, which is I'm experiencing as a dad now, with kids that are growing older. They don't need you as much as they do. But having an identical twin brother that also had very similar interests, and we're best friends. We spent all day, every day together. I didn't say, hey, when you come home from the deaf school, I'm actually going to go with my hearing friends, and you just kind of kick it. And maybe we were inseparable. So when he went to the deaf school, a lot of times I would go to the deaf school and spend the week with him. They'd let me stay in the dorms, and we were inseparable. When he would come home on the weekends, he would come out with me and all of my hearing friends, and we were inseparable. So there was a lot of interpreting for me that happened at a very young age. And with no training, I don't know how well I did, and I don't want to ask him, but I started to develop my own tendencies and my own assumptions of what good interpreting is. I knew at a young age that I couldn't take exactly what he was signing and say it exactly like he's signing it and have all of my hearing friends understand it that way. I understood this cultural mediation piece without anybody teaching me. So I would say a lot of my acquisition is homegrown. Having said that, I remember as I started out as a professional, I started in educational interpreting, which again is why I have strong feelings about educational interpreting. I did that for 5 years and loved it. Loved the kids I worked with. I loved a lot of the interpreters that I worked with. But also, as an educational interpreter, I knew that there wasn't many checks and balances. I pretty much kind of did what I wanted to do. Luckily, I had great kids that I worked with, and I had good work ethic, but there wasn't a lot of checks and balances. So I developed a lot of my own feelings about the profession without consulting a lot of professionals. I didn't get a lot of outside feedback. I just decided what I felt was right or what was the way that things should be done. I think those are good. I think I kind of like the way that I was raised as an interpreter, so to speak. When I got into freelance interpreting and working with more professionals on teams, I noticed that I could contribute a different perspective, but I wasn't way out in left field. I think sometimes young interpreters get told what they have to do and how they have to do it, and so it stifles their creativity and it puts them in a box. And if you can't fit into this box, you're a failure. You're not going to be able to do it. And I think that's where a lot of the despair comes from and a lot of the fear. I don't understand the fear part of our profession. I don't understand why people expect themselves to be so much. And that's one thing that I think I would like someone to research more. When did this fear come into the training of interpreters, and why and where does that come from? Yes. One thing that I see often with people, and again in my mentoring experience, so not as a teacher, not as an academic teacher, but in my mentoring experience, I'll have a mentee and I'll say, hey, why don't you come and team this job with me? Oh no, I couldn't do that, right? There's a phobic feeling for people who are coming out of ITP programs, and at least this is what I've seen here. I don't know nationwide, but in the state of Utah, I see people graduating with this fear of maybe it's the deaf people won't like me, maybe it's that other interpreters will tell me I'm bad, but there's a fear in it somewhere we're creating a little bit of fear in our young interpreters instead of fostering productive, I don't know the word for it, but so productive concern. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't want you to be cocky. I don't want you to come out and feel like you can take on the world, but there's a productive sense of, concern, productive concern, where maybe this is a little bigger than me, but I want to try it, and I'm interested, but I'm not afraid of it.
Yeah, no, that's good. I do want to ask, as far as your brother's language learning experiences in terms of yours, and you hear a lot about hearing privilege, and so I just kind of want to know your take on those, and especially in terms of language.
Yeah. My family, I think my brother has got one of the best experiences, and if you ask him, he'll tell you that as well. My mom is a very educated woman. I mentioned she's a veterinarian. But other than that, she also loves reading. She's read every kind of book on every kind of thing ever. Also a very skeptical person. So when they found out my brother was deaf, they told her that he was going to have to go and get a cochlear implant and learn to talk and hear and do all of this stuff. And my mom wasn't sure what to do. And she went to California. She checked on a couple of these programs. And one program she saw, there was an 8-year-old boy, and the teachers were saying, "This is so wonderful, watch what he can do." And he stood up and he read some things from a script, and then he sat down. And everybody was elated. They thought it was a wonderful thing. And my mom, no negativity, just thought, "Okay, well, that's neat, an 8-year-old boy." But then it was recess time, and she saw all of these kids were standing around not able to communicate with each other. They were able to regurgitate what they had been taught to do, but they didn't know how to interact. And so then from there, she went to the School for the Deaf in New Mexico, and they have a pre-K program. And she saw 3- and 4-year-old kids fighting with each other and fighting with the teacher and arguing back and forth in sign language, and everything was going on, and it was crazy and chaos. And she said, "That looks exactly like what happens at my house. I've got 2 twin little boys. I had an older sister who was only a year older than me. I had a younger sister who was only a year younger than me. So very close in age." And she said, "I could see that chaos, and they don't even know how to sign yet, but they're already communicating with each other." So there's something to this sign language piece. My brother learned sign language, but also, so he went to the residential school and stayed there during the week in the dorms, and would come home on the weekends and the summers. We never felt like that was a bad thing. My family very much rallied around the idea of that he needs to be with a lot of his other deaf peers. He needs to be exposed to sign language. He needs to be taught in sign language. He needs to do that. And ironically enough, like my parents, so he graduated in maybe 1998. My parents still go back every year and give away the science award for graduation every year to one student at the deaf school. Still very involved at the deaf school. So his language acquisition, I believe, flourished. I think that he helped me as much learn sign language as I helped him. Talking about, and just briefly, the two of us, so I remember being about 7 or 8 years old, and we loved cartoons, but we didn't watch cartoons that had words, because this was before captioning, and this was before accessibility stuff. So we would watch Wile E. Coyote, and we would watch Tom and Jerry, and a lot of those old cartoons that are very visual, but but didn't have a lot of language, not a lot of spoken communication. And we would recreate those. So we would watch it, and then we would recreate them back and forth to each other. And I think that's where I learned a lot of my own spatial awareness, use of classifiers, stuff like that. Was not from any specific tool, but it was from watching cartoons with my brother and then reenacting those cartoons. So yeah, I think that we both grew together. It's interesting now because if I go to an interpreter conference, it's happened twice here already. A couple people have come up and given me big hugs and been like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "I live here." But in the reverse, if I go to a deaf event, often, I apologize, I'm saying that all wrong. If my brother goes to an interpreting event, that'll happen to him. If I go to a deaf event, that'll happen to me. I've been smacked upside the head several times by people who think that I'm him. But one of the interesting things is once I tell them, no, I'm not, this and that, but if we start to chit chat for a while, people will always say, wow, you guys sign exactly the same. And I think that that's not just because we're twins, but that's because we developed our language together. And so I like the way he signs certain things, and he likes the way I sign certain things. And so really we're just pirates. We just steal each other's great signs and then try to do the best we can with that.
Well, I have loved every minute of this conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.